Shalom, this is Reb Yoseph coming to you from the land of Israel. The Shabbos before Pesach is called Shabbos HaGadol, literally the big Shabbos or the great Shabbos, and it's a custom in some synagogues to add, shall we say, a certain amount of creative compositions to the liturgy. Now, it's not an obligation, and the congregation can decide any of them which they want to include or none at all. You have a full range of them. Now, this service was written at various times. The essential component, which is Shema and its blessings in the Amida, were basically written and established after the Babylonian exile by the prophet Ezra in the Great Sanhedrin. Then you had a group of Psalms, basically Psalm 145 to 150, but others as well, other readings, that were introduced as introductory readings, Psuke de Zimra, by Rabbi Yossi in the times of the Talmud, about 200 of the Common Era. And during the medieval period, around 1100, it was the custom for the Chazan to write liturgical poetry and liturgical music for the holidays. And this is where you have the source for yotzros. Yotzro literally means creative writing, so to speak. And they range from high literary epics to basically a short string of light-hearted slogans and phrases. The idea basically was to educate and generate enthusiasm for the service. Now, the word shul, which means synagogue in the Yiddish, is related to the English word school. In fact, it could be in Yiddish used for either of them. And what it's focusing on is the idea of the synagogue being used as an educational institution and services being part of that function. And it's also supposed to be a place of assembly. Beit Knesset literally means house of assembly. And the idea is that people are assembling together to basically show their dedication to God and express it in words and in ceremony. Now, the yotzros, they're often in the siddur, in the back of the siddur, and what they will have is, or the one for Shabbos HaGadol, it has 3 insertions in the blessings before and after Kriyat Shema. They have been written for basically the 3, shall we say, pilgrim holidays, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, also the special Shabbos, also where they're the most widely used is for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Although in the case of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, you also have additional liturgical poetry inserted into the service. Okay, but getting back to Shabbos HaGadol in the insertions before and after Shema, okay, the first 2 focus on the 2 lines in the blessings, Kadosh, 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 Hashem Shavakos, Malok Loretz Kavodo. The holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts, and the world is filled with his glory. And Baruch Kavod Hashem Mim Komo. Okay, these are high points in the blessings on Kriyat Shema, where you're expressing the sanctity and the loftiness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And what these yotzros here do is they're meant to focus on the holiday itself as well as to accentuate those two lines. So what you have in them is allusions to Shir HaShirim, which is the one of the Megillah, is a Megillah that is read on Shabbos Chol HaMoed on Pesach, and you also have allusions to the slavery in English, the slavery in Egypt, and you also have dramatizations of the angels in the kingdom of heaven. Okay. Each of the first three blessings of the Shemona Esrei has an insertion. Okay. The first is basically a short introduction to the holiday of Pesach, and it's expressed in very high poetry. The second one, it includes themes of sanctity, and it's basically three short paragraphs, and it's slightly easier. The third one, which is right before Kedusha in the Shemona Esrei, which is to a certain one of the high points of Shemona Esrei, is basically 6 pages of small print, and it covers various topics of varying difficulties. Now, one of the poems is Vayhi B'chetzi Alayla, which was taken from the Yotzros. It happened in the middle of the night, or it happened at midnight. And what it's talking about is various miracles that happened at midnight, and among them is the striking of the firstborn of Egypt. Now, that one was taken from the Yotzros and put into the Haggadah, where it's one of the standard songs or chants that are sung basically after the service. Now, it's a tradition for the rabbi to take questions about the holiday and discuss its practical observance. What he would actually do is he'd get up on the bima, on the pulpit, and he'd give a sermon about the holiday where we would outline the various laws. Sometimes it would be new material, but very often it's just simply refreshing people's memory about things. However, people will have practical questions, and at that point, they will ask the rabbi. Now, what you have in the Yotzros is a very long poem, 855 words, which lucidly and with rhythm and rhyme give the standard practices of Pesach. It's called Elokai Haruchus L'chol Basar. And it was written by Rabbi Yoseph Tov Elam ben Shmuel Bonfils, to give his full name. He lived around 1150 of the Common Era. He was one of the medieval commentaries, and he's counted as one of the Tosafists. There's a commentary on the standard Vilna Shatz, the Talmud, the Gemara, and it's called Tosfot, and Tosfot literally means additions. And it was written by a variety of people. One of the important ones was the Rabbeinu Tam, the grandson of Rashi. But as I said, it was written by a number of people, among them Rabbi Yosef Tov Elam. And what it does is it, among other things, it goes through all the halakhas, but it mimics the Mishnah of Pesachim and uses expressions from the Gemara as well. Now, the first section starts with the search for chametz, and it mentions that it's supposed to be done on the evening or the night of the 14th of Nisan, and done by a torch. The idea, basically, in Pesach concerning chametz is you're supposed to basically get rid of as much of it as you possibly can, preferably all of it. It's really not feasible to get rid of all of it in most cases. What remains is you set it aside and basically you sell it to someone who is non-Jewish, and then he sells it back to you at the end of Pesach, and he sells it at a profit. Very often it's the custodian of the shul who participates in this. It's an amusing ritual. It tends to emphasize the idea that you're getting rid of all your chametz. But basically, you're supposed to do a thorough cleaning of your home. Spring cleaning, now is the time. And things that were dirty now, the chametz may have fallen behind them, and you look under your bed and you move the furniture, you move the refrigerator, you move the stove. Everything gets a thorough cleaning. But that's all a prelude to the search for chametz. And what you'll do is you'll actually search for what remains of them with a candle. This is when you're all done. So he describes that. He also describes, goes through the declaration of the annulment of chametz. After you're all done with this, what you say is, in a prescribed form, is that any chametz that you didn't see and that you don't know about, it's considered as if it's abandoned and dust of the earth. The other two things he deals with in this section is the koshering of kitchen utensils. The idea with that is that, to a certain extent, the utensils may be dirty in and of themselves, but the idea is that utensils, at least some of them, will absorb the chametz that has been cooked in them and been used in them. Something like a pot in which you cook noodles. Okay? These things would have to be koshered. Most of the time, people will just have different utensils for the holiday. Then he describes the baking of the matzah. The second section, he goes through, or basically reviews, the Pesach Seder. And among the things that he does is he describes the placement of the 4 cups of wine within the service. Now, the first cup of wine is drunk at Kiddush, which is the introduction to the service. You get up and you say essentially that today is a holy day and it's Passover, and so to speak, you have a toast to it. You drink a glass of wine on that. The second one is when you start to tell the story of Passover. Now, in between them, you do have a few rituals that are really not all that long. Eating carpus, showing it's an agricultural holiday, and things of that nature. The heart of the Seder, though, is the retelling of the story of Exodus from Egypt. And for that one, you started with a cup of wine, toasting over the Exodus. The third cup of wine is after you have eaten the meal. Part of the holiday is to have a festive meal. And when you finish the meal, when you're saying grace over the meal, grace, Birkat Hamazon, it's considered praiseworthy to say that with over a cup of wine, toasting to the good meal that you had. When you're doing it on Passover, it's considered an obligation. You must do it. And it's all, as I said, the idea of the 4 cups of wine is you have to have 4 cups of wine. That's one of the practices of Passover, but each one has significance in and of itself. The 4th cup is said at the end of Hallel. Now, what Hallel is a group of psalms of thanksgiving and praise for the redemption of Passover. It's around Psalm 113 to 118, as I recall. And what you do is actually, the meal is in the middle of this, and then after you finish the meal, you resume Hallel. And when you finish it, you have the final cup of wine. And in effect, the final cup of wine after Hallel is the conclusion of the Seder. You might do a few short things after that, but basically that's it. And what you're doing is, it's, so to speak, a toast for goodwill and appreciation and happiness for the redemption of Passover, but it's also marking the conclusion of the Seder. This piyut ends with 2 stanzas that basically are an epilogue. I'll say it right now. We have completed the sequence of Passover, the way it's practiced with all its rules and regulations. Like we have merited to learn it, may we merit to do it as well. Okay, that is the part where after you said this prayer in the service, or this poem, this lesson, what you're doing is saying a prayer that your learning should bring you to action, and that you'll have a proper Seder, that you will in fact have a Seder. It's only a week later, so you don't have to be all that worried about it. Then it continues with the prayer. Pure One who dwells in heaven, lift up the congregation, the community that cannot be numbered. It says, Mimana Afar Yaakov, who can count the dust of Yaakov? So to speak, you're not supposed to take a census of the Jewish people directly. It's an allusion to that. It says, soon guide the seedlings of your plantation, redeemed captives to Zion with joyous song. Okay, I'll sing the piyut to you right now. Chasal Sidur Pesach Kehilchaso Kachol Mishpato V'chukaso Kasher Zachinu L'sadar Oso Kasher Zachinu L'sadar Oso Kein Nizket La'asoso Zach Shochein Ma'ona Komen Kahal Adat Mimana Bakarov Nahal Nitekana Bakarov Nahal Nitekana Pidyurim Litzion Berina Lashana Haba Berushalayim Lashana Haba Berushalayim Lashana Haba Berushalayim Lashana Haba Berushalayim Berushalayim Habenuya. Thank you. Have a nice Pesach. Shalom.